It was 15 years ago that Kayla and I tied the knot. We had dated exclusively for 3 years before that, starting with our first date when Kayla was a sophomore in college. My name is Colin Norman, and I was a junior when Kayla and I first met at a party. From that moment, we were inseparable until I graduated 2 years later. During Kayla's senior year, we were apart, but we had already made plans to marry after her graduation. 6 months into our marriage, we attended a barbecue with several other couples our age. The evening was filled with steaks on the grill, plenty of drinks, and lively conversation. As the night wore on, the group dwindled to just us and 3 other couples, gathered around a fire pit, talking and laughing. That's when the topic of the celebrity hall pass came up. "What the hell is a celebrity hall pass?" I asked, genuinely confused. Sadie, a petite blonde sitting to my left, was quick to explain. "A celebrity hall pass is exactly what it sounds like. It's a game where you pick a celebrity you'd hypothetically get a pass from your marital vows to be with. You know, someone you were allowed to have intimacy with, just for fun." I frowned, still processing. "So, this is just a silly game?" "Yes and no," Sadie replied, giving her husband Tom a playful pat on the leg. "Yes, it's a game, but Tom and I actually made it an agreement. We've given each other one hall pass. It doesn't even have to be a celebrity." I was stunned. "Wait, are you serious? You mean you and Tom have an actual agreement where either of you can be with someone else?" Tom grinned and met my gaze, seemingly unfazed. "That's right, buddy. There's more to it, but yeah, that's the gist." He gestured toward the other 2 couples. "They've all got the same agreement, too. Katie, you've used yours, haven't you?" Katie, sitting across from us, lowered her head, clearly embarrassed. "Tom, you don't have to broadcast it," she muttered. "Well, it's true," Tom said, undeterred. "Katie was at a conference when she met a guy, a widower whose wife had recently died in an accident. She called Carl," he nodded toward Katie's husband, "and told him she wanted to use her pass to help the guy." Kayla, who had been quiet until then, squeezed my hand and spoke up. "Carl, you were really okay with Katie doing that?" Carl shrugged, appearing relaxed. "Yeah, it's fine. She came home to me afterward, and I know I'll use mine one day." The group continued discussing their passes, naming their chosen celebrities. Kayla even nudged me into picking one after she announced hers. 15 years later, I couldn't recall who we each chose, but I do remember the intense intimacy Kayla and I shared when we got home that night. During it, she even admitted she was fantasizing about her hall pass pick. The next morning, I made it crystal clear that I would never agree to a hall pass, and Kayla reassured me it was just a game. The events of that night faded into the background as life moved on. Kayla and I started our family soon after, welcoming a boy and a girl in quick succession. Over time, we lost touch with Sadie and Tom, especially after their divorce. A couple of years ago, I ran into Tom by chance at a bar. He was drinking alone, and we shared a few drinks while catching up. He told me that not only had he and Sadie divorced, but the other 2 couples from that barbecue had also split up. According to Tom, the hall pass agreements were at the root of every divorce. "We all thought it would add some excitement, but we couldn't have been more wrong," he admitted. "Using the passes led to comparisons, suspicions, and ultimately, contempt. That's what destroyed our marriages." His words validated the unease I'd felt about the hall pass idea from the beginning. What might have seemed like harmless fantasy was, in reality, a recipe for disaster. I had intended to share this encounter with Kayla, but with our hectic lives, it never came up. Now, sitting here, I wish I had. It was a Thursday night and Kayla was away at a conference in Los Angeles. Around midnight, my phone rang. It was Kayla. The noise in the background suggested she was at a club, and I could tell from her voice she'd been drinking. "You're not going to believe this," she slurred, "but we just met Spencer from my soap opera. He likes me, and I'm going to use my hall pass." My stomach dropped. "What did you just say? Did you say something about a hall pass?" "Yeah, honey, I knew you'd understand. See you Saturday." The noise on her end grew louder, and before I could respond, the call ended. Panicked, I tried calling her back, but it went straight to voicemail. I left several messages begging her not to do anything reckless and reminding her of the consequences of breaking our vows. I sent text after text, but there was no reply. The rest of the night, I got no word from Kayla. I tried calling her repeatedly the next morning, but her phone remained unreachable. Friday was an agonizing day. Not knowing what my wife was doing in Los Angeles ate away at me. After work, I took the kids to my parents' house and dropped them off, deciding I needed to figure things out. From there, I headed straight to John's place. John's wife, Sydney, had gone on the same trip as Kayla. They worked together and were close friends, so I hoped Sydney might know something. John opened the door, surprised to see me standing there. "Hey, Colin, what's up?" "I need your help," I said, my voice tense. "I can't get a hold of Kayla. She called me last night and something felt off. Can you call Sydney and see if she knows anything?" John nodded, though his brow furrowed in concern. "Sure, Colin. I'll call her and tell her you're looking for Kayla." "No, don't tell her I'm here," I interjected quickly. "I'm afraid Kayla might have asked her to cover for her. Could you just bring up Kayla casually and let me listen in?" John hesitated, but eventually nodded. "Okay, buddy, I'll call. They should be out of their classes around now." As John pulled out his phone, I instinctively switched on the voice recorder on mine. I didn't know what drove me to do it, but I wanted to have a record of whatever was said. Sydney answered on the first ring. "Hey, honey," she said warmly. "You must have ESP. I just got back to my room after classes. We have that dinner tonight, and I'll see you tomorrow." John and Sydney chatted about the conference for a bit before he smoothly brought up Kayla. "Have you seen much of Kayla? Colin left me a message asking about her." Sydney hesitated. "Shh, don't tell him we talked," she whispered. "The last time I saw her was last night. We were out drinking when this really attractive soap star came over to our table. Kayla got his autograph, and they danced a few times. Then she mentioned that she and Colin had a hall pass agreement." Sydney sighed audibly before continuing. "The soap star immediately offered to be her partner. I tried to talk her out of it, but she said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She whispered to me that she was going to let the guy be with her. The next thing I knew, she was arm in arm with him, leaving the club. I haven't seen her since. God, John, please don't tell Colin." John ended the call and turned to me, his face filled with sympathy. "I'm sorry, brother. Do you guys have an agreement about a hall pass?" I shook my head, my jaw tight. "No, we played that celebrity hall pass game years ago, but I made it clear I would never agree to something like that." "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, "but it won't be good." On my way home, I stopped back at my parents' house to ask Mom if she could keep the kids for the weekend. She could tell something was wrong, but I didn't give her any details. Back at home, I tried calling and texting Kayla again, but there was no response. I assumed she had turned off her phone to avoid being disturbed while doing whatever she was doing with her soap star. Kayla's flight was scheduled to arrive mid-afternoon. Since Sydney had gotten a ride with Kayla, I asked John to text me as soon as Kayla dropped her off. Preparing for her arrival, I set up the video camera on a shelf in the living room, positioning it to capture everything. I slipped the remote control for the camera under my leg and waited, my nerves on edge. At 4 o'clock, John's text came through. Kayla would be home in about 20 minutes. My heart pounded as I sat in the living room, rehearsing how I would confront her. The rumble of the garage door made me jump. I hit the record button on the remote and tried to keep my composure as the door from the kitchen opened. Kayla walked in, suitcase in hand, practically glowing with excitement. "Oh my God, what a crazy trip," she exclaimed. "Yeah, I bet," I replied coolly. "I've been trying to call you." "My phone broke," she said, setting her bag down. I dropped it and the screen shattered. Keeping my voice steady, I brought up her call from Thursday night. "The last time I talked to you, you sounded strange. You mentioned meeting a soap star and something about using your hall pass." Kayla lit up. "Oh yeah, we were at this club, and Spencer Cooper came over to our table. You know, the star from my soap opera. We danced a few times, and he started talking about our hall pass agreement. Damn, he's so hot. He told me he wanted me to use my pass on him. That's why I called you. Can you believe it? He took me to his house and, well, you probably don't want the details." "No, I do," I said, my voice sharp. "Tell me how he was intimate with my wife." Still oblivious to my anger, Kayla laughed. "Oh, Colin, you should have seen him. He's so experienced. He knows exactly how to please a woman. He even took one of those pills." "Damn, you're going to have to try one." He lasted forever, and he was incredible. Those stories about actors being good in bed? All true. Her giddy recounting of the encounter was too much. My expression must have finally registered, because she suddenly stopped and asked, "Colin, are you okay?" "No, Kayla," I said, my voice hard. "I'm not okay. My wife is standing here in our living room, gleefully confessing to adultery, as if it's some kind of achievement. Adultery? What are you talking about? She asked, confused. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Spencer was my hall pass. I thought you'd be happy for me. I got to live out a dream. A dream? I shot back. That's what you're calling it? And I'm supposed to be happy that you broke our wedding vows? I didn't break our vows, Kayla protested, her expression turning defensive. I took a weekend off to live out a fantasy, Kayla said defensively. It's no different than what our friends did. I just used my hall pass. Her expression began to shift, concern creeping in as I stared at her. No, Kayla, I said firmly. That was just a game, and I made it crystal clear at the time. It was only a game. I told you I would never violate our marriage vows, and I wouldn't stand for you doing it either. If you had a chance to be with a celebrity, I'd be fine with it, she insisted. I don't understand why you can't just be happy for me. I had an experience I'll never forget. Oh, don't worry, I won't forget either, I replied sharply. And I'm sure the family you conveniently forgot about won't forget it either. I walked over to her, grabbed her hand, and slid her wedding ring off her finger. Did you have intimacy with him while still wearing this? I asked, holding up the symbol of our love and commitment. Did you even consider what it represents? We didn't make love. It was just intimacy, she retorted. And yes, I had it on. I thought about taking it off, but Spencer wanted me to leave it on. Of course he did, I snapped. He wanted to mock your marriage, knowing full well you were a married woman. Kayla shifted her stance, placing a hand on her hip, her signature move when she was angry. You're blowing this way out of proportion, she said, her voice rising. It was just 2 nights. Why don't we go upstairs, and I'll make it up to you? Thanks, but no thanks, I said coldly. Let me ask you something. Did Soap Boy use protection? Her brows furrowed. Well, no, she admitted, clearly confused by the question. You let a man have unprotected intimacy with you? A man you think has been with over 100 women? And let's not forget, he's a TV star. He's probably been with some men too. Who knows what kind of Hollywood diseases he might have passed on to you? Kayla's defiance faltered for a moment before she replied, Colin, stop being dramatic. I'm healthy, and Spencer is careful. Careful? Really? He might have given you something else, though. Unless, of course, you've started taking the pill again? Her eyes widened slightly. No, you know I'm not on it. I don't need to be. Right, because we have an understanding, I said, shaking my head. Oh, wait, maybe you're pregnant. Imagine that. You might be carrying a soap star's baby. Kayla's face blanched as the weight of my words hit her. No, that's not possible. I had my period last week, so I'm not fertile. It's interesting you're only considering that now, I said dryly. Ever heard of early ovulation? How many times did he not use protection? Colin, you're making this into a much bigger deal than it is, she said, her voice growing defensive again. A bigger deal? I shot back. My wife just committed adultery, and you think I should act like it's nothing? You're throwing away our marriage, our family, for what? Kayla began stamping her feet in frustration. I told you, it's not adultery. I used my hall pass. I even called you to tell you. Why can't you just let this go? That's the problem, Kayla. You used something that doesn't exist. I never gave you permission to quit our marriage or destroy our family. Quit being so dramatic, she said, her voice now laced with irritation. I thought you'd be happy for me. Clearly I was wrong. I'm done talking about this. Where are the kids? They're at my parents' house, I said flatly. I didn't want them here while we discussed our divorce. What? What do you mean by divorce? She asked, her voice rising in disbelief. You're going to divorce me over this? No, Kayla, I said, keeping my tone as calm as possible. We're not getting a divorce. You made your choice, and now I'll make mine. That's ridiculous. You're telling me you're going to throw away our family for this? It's not a big deal, Colin. You'll just have to get over it, she shouted. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and calmly walked upstairs to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind me. For over an hour, she pounded on the door, yelling that we needed to talk. I gave her silence. The next morning, I got up early and left the house before Kayla woke up. I drove to my parents' house, where I found my dad in the kitchen, already up. Over coffee, I told him everything. He listened quietly, not saying a word until I finished. When I was done, he looked up at me and said, "What a cheating woman." "Dad," I asked, "what would you do if you were in my shoes?" He sighed, his face lined with the wisdom of his years. He sighed, his face lined with the wisdom of his years. Son, times were different when I was your age. Back then, this kind of betrayal would have been completely unforgivable. You've got to decide what's right for you and take the steps you need to protect yourself and your family. I don't think I can get past this, Dad. She knew how I felt about infidelity. I thought she felt the same way. What about that prenup her mom made you sign? He asked. I frowned. Her mom told me at the wedding that she didn't want to discuss it. She just said she had her reasons. Dad nodded. Kayla's mom probably saw this coming. She told me once that Kayla's dad betrayed her several times. I'm sure she wanted to protect her daughter. Well, it seems Kayla forgot all about that, I said bitterly. Dad chuckled. Oh, I'm sure you're going to remind her. Eventually, I replied. But first, I want to see what she does next. She kept saying it wasn't a big deal and that I needed to get over it. I don't think she's even sorry. It was nearly 11 o'clock when my phone began buzzing. Kayla was calling and texting nonstop, demanding to know where I was. When I didn't respond, she started calling the kids. Sarah, our daughter, walked into the kitchen, yawning. Dad, Mom wants to know where you are. Why aren't you answering her calls? What did she tell you? I asked. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Funny, that's exactly what she asked me. She wants to know what you told us. What's going on with you two? Are you cheating on her, or is she cheating on you? Dad chuckled softly, shaking his head. Well, damn. She's perceptive. Sarah crossed her arms, her face serious. Oh, crap. Mom cheated on you, didn't she? I think you should ask your mother that question, I told Sarah calmly. I didn't want to be accused of influencing her opinion. Still, I knew my daughter well enough to expect that she'd be deeply upset with Kayla once she put the pieces together. Sarah, ever the determined teenager, immediately pulled out her phone and put it on speaker. Dad's here, she said to Kayla. Did you cheat on him? Kayla's voice came through, defensive and shaky. Sarah, what are you talking about? Whatever he said isn't true. What did Dad tell you? Sarah countered. He didn't tell me anything, Mom. I can see it on his face. You betrayed him, didn't you? Sarah's voice was steady, her accusation direct. No, I didn't, Kayla insisted, though her tone betrayed her unease. And if he says I did, he's lying. Sarah sighed heavily. Okay, Mom, you sound guilty to me. Without another word, she hung up the call and turned to me. Sorry, Dad. I can't believe she did that to you. I assume you're going to divorce her. You've always taught us the importance of honesty and morality. I don't blame you if that's what you decide. Sarah's expression was somber as she turned and headed upstairs. My father, who had been sitting quietly, shook his head. Your kid has a good head on her shoulders, he said. She's mature, way beyond her years. She'll get through this just fine. I'm not sure I will, I admitted. About 30 minutes later, there was a loud knock at the door. Dad got up to answer it, and I could hear Kayla's voice on the other side. Mr. Norman, I don't know what your son told you, but he made it all up. I haven't done anything wrong. Dad stood firm. Whatever you say, Kayla, but you're not welcome here today. Tell him I didn't do anything, she yelled. And if he keeps saying I did, it'll mean trouble for him. When Dad returned to the kitchen, I looked at him. She seemed angry. Be careful, son, Dad warned. I've seen that look before. She's not going down easy. That woman's like a cornered cat. She's going to lie and claw her way out. You'd better be ready to prove what she did because she looks ready for a fight. Later that day, the kids and I returned home. Kayla was silent, giving me the cold shoulder, but I stayed in the guest room again that night. This time, there was no pounding on the door. The next morning, after the kids had left for school, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee. Kayla came into the room, looking as if nothing had happened. Did the kids get off to school okay? She asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. I nodded but didn't respond. She glanced at me. Honey, why are you sleeping in the guest room? Are you feeling all right? You know why, I said flatly. I don't want to sleep near my cheating wife. Cheating wife? She repeated, her tone indignant. Colin, what are you talking about? Are you going to deny that you were intimate with a soap star while you were out of town last week? I asked. Kayla's demeanor changed instantly. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. Colin, I don't know what you're trying to pull here, she said, her voice cold. But if you accuse me of something you can't prove, you'll regret it. There it is, I said, my voice calm. You've declared war. No, I haven't, she snapped. We can go back to the way things were, but that's up to you. I'm willing to forget these baseless accusations if you are. Sorry, but I can't forget what you did. I replied. I didn't do anything, she said firmly. And more importantly, you can't prove that I did. If you try to say otherwise, you'll regret it. Let it go, Colin, and let's move on with our marriage. I recognized the threat for what it was, but said nothing. Instead, I got up, grabbed my car keys, and walked out as if heading to work. I had already called in sick. Once Kayla left for her job as an associate principal, I returned to the house. Her warning had been clear, and if she was preparing for a fight, I needed to arm myself with evidence. Sydney had mentioned that Kayla got the soap star's autograph, which she wouldn't dare display publicly if she planned to deny the affair. It had to be hidden somewhere. It took me 2 hours of searching, but I finally found it. In the back of her side of the closet was an old briefcase, locked. Kayla always used the same code for her locks, so it didn't take long to open. At the bottom, beneath several folders, was a signed publicity photo of the soap star. The front was innocuous enough, to my friend Kayla, Spencer Cooper, but on the back there was a handwritten note that said, "You were great in bed. Spencer." I scanned the photo and put it back exactly where I found it. Before leaving, I also scanned a copy of our prenuptial agreement, Sydney's phone recording, and my recording of Kayla's confession. All the files were saved onto 2 flash drives. My next stop was a lawyer, Vicky Hudson, renowned for her ruthless approach to handling cheating spouses. She listened intently as I laid out my story and explained how I wanted to handle the situation. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, a sly smile spreading across her face. "I love this," she said. "You're setting the perfect trap. Let her think she has the upper hand, and when there's no turning back, we'll spring it. But you know it's going to be uncomfortable for a while. People might think you're lying or crazy until we reveal the proof." "I know," I said. "That's exactly what I want. Let her feel like she's in control, right up until the moment she isn't." Mrs. Hudson shook my hand as I left her office. "I'll prepare the paperwork and have her served at school, but first, I need you to do a few things for me," she said. "Check your credit card statements to identify the club where she hooked up with the soap star. Also, see if you can access her iCloud. She's probably smart enough to remove anything incriminating from her phone, but there might still be something backed up there." Rushing home, I opened Kayla's computer and accessed her iCloud account. To my surprise, it wasn't even password protected. Hidden in her pictures folder, I found exactly what I was looking for. 3 photos, 2 of Kayla with the soap star, and 1 of her with both the soap star and Sydney. I copied them to a flash drive. A closer look at the photos revealed another key detail. The name of the club was visible on a wall in the background. When I shared this with Mrs. Hudson, she was thrilled. "This is perfect," she said. "But under no circumstances should you tell anyone about these photos yet. My plan is to serve Kayla at school this Friday afternoon. That will give you time to get the kids to your parents for the weekend. And remember, you are not to move out of the house, no matter what Kayla says or does." On Friday, after dropping the kids off at my parents' house, my phone buzzed with a call from Kayla. I let it go to voicemail and ignored the texts that followed. I had barely been home for 10 minutes when she stormed in. I turned on the video camera as the garage door rumbled, ensuring I didn't miss anything. "You son of a," she began, yelling as she entered the living room. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I started to respond, but she cut me off. "You just couldn't let it go, could you? What is it, Colin? Is your fragile male ego that bruised?" She glared at me. "You humiliated me in front of my staff, and you're going to pay for it. You want a divorce? Fine. But you're going to regret this. You know you can't prove adultery. Without that, I'll take you for everything you've got. I hope you're happy. You could have let me have my fun, but no, you had to make it about you." Kayla stomped around the room, her anger palpable. Finally, she spun around and demanded, "When are you moving out?" "I'm not moving out," I said calmly. "I'm staying right here." "Oh, yes, you are," she snapped. "You want a divorce? Then pack your bags and leave." She stared at me, expecting me to back down. When I didn't move, she threw her hands up in frustration. "Fine. When this is over, you'll wish you'd kept your mouth shut and just let it go." The next month in the house was tense. Kayla and I didn't speak, and the kids gradually started taking her side. Sarah even began questioning whether her mother had actually cheated. Kayla was telling anyone who would listen that I'd fabricated the entire story. Her lawyer filed a response to my petition, requesting sanctions for what they claimed were false accusations. She even tried to get the court to order me out of the house, but that request was denied. The court fast-tracked our hearing, giving both sides limited time for depositions and witness interviews. Mrs. Hudson deposed both Kayla and Sydney. Predictably, they both denied Kayla's encounter with the soap star, claiming they never met him or went to a club. When it was time for my deposition, Mrs. Hudson advised me to tell the truth, but not to volunteer any extra information. She hoped that Kayla's lawyer wouldn't suspect we had evidence of her affair. Her prediction was spot on. During the deposition, Kayla's lawyer focused on the fact that I hadn't personally witnessed anything, seemingly unaware that Kayla was lying. At the hearing, Kayla seemed confident. I testified about her adultery, explaining my feelings about infidelity and my opposition to the hall pass concept. During cross-examination, I repeated what I had said in the deposition. I hadn't been at her conference and hadn't seen her do anything firsthand. Kayla testified next, maintaining her innocence. She claimed she shared my views on adultery and insisted she would never condone the idea of a hall pass. Kayla's lawyer called Sydney to the stand, hoping to solidify their case. Sydney repeated the same denials, claiming the encounter with the soap star never happened. From across the courtroom, I glanced at her husband, John, who sat in the audience. He avoided my eyes, his head lowered. When Mrs. Hudson cross-examined Sydney, she brought up the phone call to John about Kayla leaving with the soap star. Sydney squirmed, but stuck to her story, denying everything. When Sydney stepped down, both Kayla and her lawyer looked smug, confident they had discredited my claims. Kayla's lawyer announced that they had no further evidence and began arguing for sanctions against me, calling my accusations baseless. The judge appeared ready to agree when Mrs. Hudson stood up with a sly smile. "Excuse me, Your Honor, but we have rebuttal evidence." Kayla's lawyer shot up. "I object. We were not notified of any rebuttal evidence." Mrs. Hudson remained composed. "There is no requirement to disclose rebuttal evidence. If their witnesses had been truthful, no rebuttal would have been necessary." The judge nodded, allowing Mrs. Hudson to proceed. She called her investigator to the stand. "Before we continue, Your Honor, we will concede that Mrs. Norman did not have intimacy with Spencer Cooper." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But Mrs. Hudson gave me a sharp look, silently urging me to stay quiet. Her investigator testified that Spencer Cooper, the soap star Kayla believed she was with, had been in Europe during the week of her conference. Kayla's lawyer immediately stood up, triumphant. "With this admission that my client didn't commit adultery, we demand the court dismiss this baseless case and issue sanctions against Mr. Norman," the lawyer said. Mrs. Hudson, smiling broadly, countered, "We are not saying Mrs. Norman didn't commit adultery. We're simply stating it wasn't with Spencer Cooper." The courtroom fell silent as Sydney was recalled to the stand. My lawyer asked her again if she had been with Kayla at the conference and whether they had met who they thought was Spencer Cooper. Sydney repeated her denials. When asked if she had called her husband to report that Kayla left with a man who wasn't her husband, she again denied it, even after being reminded she was under oath. I glanced at her husband, John, who mouthed, "I'm sorry." I shook my head and silently mouthed back, "No, you will be." My lawyer then pressed play on the recording of Sydney's call. Kayla's lawyer jumped to his feet, objecting. The recording was made while my client was in her own home and was entitled to privacy. Mrs. Hudson calmly responded, "Your Honor, my client was a guest in the witness's home and had permission to listen to the call." The judge turned to Sydney. "Is that your voice in the recording?" Sydney hesitated but was forced to admit, "Yes." I felt a surge of vindication as the recording clearly proved I had been telling the truth. Kayla was next on the stand. She denied everything, including admitting to her actions when she returned home from the trip. Her confidence shattered as the video recording of her own explicit description of her intimacy with Spencer Cooper played in court. Kayla burst into tears as the photos from her iCloud, including selfies with the soap star lookalike and the signed publicity photo, were entered into evidence. As Kayla stepped down, the judge interrupted. "Counsel, I'm confused. You stated that Mrs. Norman did not have intimacy with Spencer Cooper, yet you've presented evidence to the contrary." Mrs. Hudson stood and called her investigator back to the stand. "Your Honor, our evidence confirms Mrs. Norman did commit adultery, but not with Spencer Cooper." The investigator then displayed surveillance photos from the club. Several images showed Kayla with the man she left the club with. The photos confirmed he was not Spencer Cooper, but a lookalike who frequented such places to pick up married women. He was also a known individual with several STDs. I glanced at Kayla, and the look of shock on her face was priceless. After a short recess, the judge returned to deliver his ruling, He gave a lengthy speech on the importance of honesty and faithfulness, ultimately ruling that Kayla had violated the terms of our prenuptial agreement. The ruling was in my favor. He also declared that even without the prenup, he would have granted me custody of our children, finding Kayla unfit as a mother due to her extensive attempts at deception. As Kayla began to leave the stand in tears, the judge bellowed, "Mrs. Norman, stay put. We're not done yet." He summoned Sydney to the bench alongside Kayla. "You both swore to tell the truth in this courtroom, a sacred oath. Lying is lying. If this were a criminal case, you'd both be facing jail time. I am holding you both in contempt of court for committing perjury." The judge imposed the maximum fine of $5,000 on each of them. Kayla's already bad day got worse when she left the courthouse. A local news crew, tipped off by my lawyer, was waiting for her. "Mrs. Norman, do you have a comment on throwing away your family for a one-night stand with a fake TV star?" the reporter asked. That question pushed Kayla over the edge. Letting out a blood-curdling scream, she lunged at the reporter. It was a blur of fists and shouting as Kayla attacked, pulling the reporter to the ground by her hair. The chaos ended only when a deputy deployed a taser, subduing her. The entire incident was caught on camera and made national news. Kayla didn't get to see her moment of infamy. She spent the next 6 months in the county jail. I didn't have a new partner lined up to replace her. I was too busy raising our 2 kids as a single parent. And no, I didn't reunite with Kayla when she got out of jail, even though she tried. My mother, ever compassionate, urged me to give her another chance. Kayla had lost her career and become a subject of ridicule in our town. After 3 months of relentless calls and texts, I finally agreed to meet her at her mom's house. Kayla poured her heart out, saying how much she loved and missed me, and regretted what she'd done. She was devastated by her limited supervised visits with the kids due to her conviction. "I'm so sorry for lying about the hookup," she said, her voice trembling. "I was conned by a fake, and I'm embarrassed. Please, Colin, give me another chance. I'll be the best wife ever." I stood up, taking a deep breath. "Kayla, that was a passionate speech, and I believe you mean every word. You apologized for lying, said you missed our family, and claimed you love me. I believe you." Her face lit up with hope, but I wasn't finished. "It's what you didn't say that's most telling. You never apologized for breaking our wedding vows. You don't seem sorry for cheating on me, or even admitting that it was cheating. I think you're only sorry it didn't work out with your so-called dream guy. The answer is no, Kayla. Hell no. I will not take you back. Not now, not ever. Stop contacting me. If you don't, I'll renew the restraining order." Kayla stood up, sobbing. I'm sorry I enjoyed it. Is that what you wanted to hear?" I looked her in the eyes, my voice steady. "We're done, Kayla. Go live your life. It won't be with me." I walked out the door as her mom held her back, while Kayla screamed after me.